Hey everyone, welcome back to the fourth episode of the Langchain and Gemini series. We're finally at that stage where we can build a full-fledged chatbot by ourselves and code it out here in Google Colab. Let's start and by recapping what we've done in the past three episodes. We've understood what Langchain and Gemini are. We've imported our respective packages. We've specified an encoding format, loaded the Gemini file that hosts our Gemini credentials. Then we set up the environment, moved on, built a basic model, a basic chain template, a pipeline using prompts, understood what Langchain expression language is. In the second video, we saw how to handle multiple topics in this chain, where each topic is a placeholder in our prompt, understood the responses and the components. In the third video, we understood what or how to build a conversational chain without memory, similar to the second video, but this is more precise and helps you build on top with a conversational chain with memory. Then we delved into how to build a chain with memory, and this is the concept which we'll be using in our today's video. We imported the necessary libraries, so this is what you'll be needing today. You'll also be needing the this line where from operator import item getter. You need these four lines of code. We'll code the other things out as we go along. So the model I'll be using is Gemini 1.5 Pro latest. We saw an error in the Gemini Pro, that's why we're using this model. A brief recap. So conversational buffer window would help you store the last k or n conversations. So it would help you store last n conversations. Then you specify a prompt. The prompt would be to specify the system to behave in a particular way, fetch the conversations, and then accept the user's input to respond. We then store every conversation into the memory. So that's where it is happening. We pass on we load the memory data, then we access this memory data that we loaded. We give a prompt on top of it and send it to the model. So this is how it worked out. We saw that how memory works, how responses are stored, and how we can access those. Let's move on. Let's build a full-fledged chatbot as promised. I'll start by, so it will all be encapsulated in a single function, and that function is what I'm going to write now. Let me call my function define. So def is how you start the function. Let's call it def chatbot. We'll need a couple of arguments here. So system prompt. System prompt is either something which I can specify right here, which would be the default variable, or I can do it down below. So let's say I specify it here. Call it act as a helpful AI bot. That's one. Then I'll say comma. I'll add another default argument. I'll say conversation length. So what is the history of conversations that we want to retain in the model's memory? Let's say that's by default it's 10. And what is the model? The name of our model is model itself. We've defined the model variable, the model earlier. The model was this one. So this is already defined since I've run this cell. So 1.5 Pro latest, the model is already here. Let's put in a colon and move to the next line. So we have our system prompt, conversation length, and the model defined. Let's build the prompt. So let's call our prompt as chat prompt template. This is what we used earlier as well. Dot prompt underscore messages. We open the brackets, we open the square brackets, and then delve in, open the round brackets, and say we want the model to act like a system. So you remember there are three ways in this model in which the model can act. It is either a system, a user, or an assistant. You can read the differences between all of these. Let's then say that the system prompt is how I want my model to behave. So that's model behavior. Then put in a comma and move on to the next line. Then we call the messages placeholder class. We've done this before. So messages placeholder, where the variable name is the argument. This variable name will contain the conversation log, which holds the historical conversations. That is the historical conversations. And the last line is where the user will give his input. Let's move out of this prompt and move to the next step. So our next step is to build a conversation memory. Conversation memory would be, it is conversation buffer memory. So we already have it. Conversation buffer window memory, and return message is true, and k is equal to conversation length. So that's fine. That's pre-filled for us. Conversation length is 10 as we defined here in the function itself. Remember that we are still within the function, which you can see by the indent. Then the next thing is, let's say conversation underscore chain. So conversation chain, that would be the name of our pipeline. Let me open the brackets, move in and say runnable pass through dot assign conversation log. Conversation log is runnable lambda. Conversation memory dot load memory variables. This is where we load the historical messages. So that's step 1. That is loading the historical messages in your pipeline. This would be step 1. Remember, we've entered the pipeline here. So pipeline. In the second step, we get those historical messages. So this is step number 2. Get the historical messages. Rather, let me call it get the history. Then step number 3 would be to place the prompt on top of it. So that's step number 3. And then move everything inside the model and call it step number 4. So your pipeline is complete with these 4 steps. This is an extra bracket, I think. Let's also remove return conversation chain. So we don't need this code, right? So we've completed our basic framework. Let's start how our model would, or what would the first sentence be, which the user sees. Let's print or hard code a line. Let's say welcome to the chatbot. How may I help you today? These are just for aesthetics. You can have any text here. And let's move on to the next line. So let me initiate, since we want a loop, we want the conversation to keep going on. We'll specify a while loop. So while helps you to run an infinite loop. So let's say while true. I'll say my prompt is input. So this is the input box that we'll provide in the space below. And let's say it says you, and the user can input in front of this. Then in the next line, I'll say that if prompt. So this line would help the user break out of the code. So let's say if we just leave the code here where we say while true, the loop will keep on continuing and you'll never be able to get out of it unless you forcefully stop the runtime. The other way is that you say if the prompt, or if you give the user the option to get out of the loop. So you say if prompt, and if the prompt is, let's say, use any word like let's say quit, right? So if the user puts in quit in, let's say, small or uppercase, either case. So this would convert the prompt in uppercase and compare with the string quit. So if you say quit, then we'll break and come out of the loop. It would be abrupt true break like this. So let's add a line of message saying print goodbye. Okay, so that's again for aesthetics only, but ultimately the result would be that we'll break out of this loop. Let's also specify it somewhere that to, let's say, type quit. I think I need double brackets. So type quit to exit and single bracket close. Let me correct the spelling for chatbot. Break. So this is where the prompt, if the prompt is quit, then break. But what if it's anything else? Then we move to the main segment where we say user input. We define this variable and say input. So this input is what we've seen earlier as well here. So this placeholder input is what we're finally defining down here and saying user input colon and say that it is nothing but your prompt. Then we generate a response and say store that response in this variable called response. Use the conversation chain, the pipeline. So we invoke the pipeline, and what input does it accept? It accepts the input which the user will type in. So using this keyword. So then we print then we print the response. Let's say Gemini AI response, and the Gemini AI response would be response.content. Remember, this step is very important, where you store the response in the memory. So response as well as the input, you store all of it inside the memory. That is how you build a chain in which the model remembers, the chatbot, the function, it remembers what you've done. All of this is inside the while loop. Let me run this function. I think we successfully run it. I think if I just call it right here, chatbot, it should be giving me an option to run. So I'll say define trust in a sentence. Otherwise the responses might get lengthy, so I'll keep it short. But this is the hard-coded U that we placed here, and Gemini AI is the string we placed here, and the response is what follows. So let's ask it, define electricity in a sentence. Again, this is to keep things short, flow of charge, etc. And let's see if it realizes or if it remembers what we've talked about. So what have we talked about this far? We've talked about the definitions of trust and electricity. So we can see that it remembers what we talked about. Let's see if I can quit by typing in quit, and it says goodbye. So we see how a single function, we've entailed or engulfed everything inside a single function and called that function. We were able to do it because we specified the default arguments here. You can also specify the arguments in your function below. So let's say I take all of this, copy it and paste it down here. The model is the same. The conversation length is, say I want a smaller window of 5, and system prompt is act as a scientist. Let's run this. Define trust in a sentence. Formally derived with the ability of someone or something. So if you want to compare, I hope you could compare the response which we got the previous time. And this one is a bit more technical than that. So let me type quit here. I also want to see the memory variable that we have, the conversation memory variable. So you remember we do dot load, and so we do memory dot load variables and see what the response is. Let me type so we are using the keyword, we're using the variable conversation memory. So let me replace memory with conversation memory and run it. Okay, since conversation memory is defined inside a function, we can't call it right away. So let me make it a global variable. I'll make it a global variable, run this conversation memory. Okay, run the second line of code. Define trust in a line, and then I'll type quit. Goodbye. Okay, conversation memory load variables, and now we see that we have our history as well. So I just made it a global variable which can be accessed outside of this function to help you see that we have one line of history here. We can also add more to it as we call this function again and use the chatbot. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You were able to build a fully functional chatbot, chatbot based on Gemini and Langchain, as well as these various functions. Do watch out the previous 3 parts to understand everything from the basic, where I teach and type everything from scratch, where you will understand it clearly, and then move on to the future videos for clearer understanding. I hope you were able to follow. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.